Welcome. Today we're going to be discussing the technique securing the storm and how to relate it to other elements of the American Kenpo system. So keep in mind two things. First, this is not a comprehensive list, and second, it is not family groupings. The better way to think about this video is that it's just different avenues to explore so that you can relate securing the storm to different self-defense techniques of American Kenpo. So for this video, we're going to be sticking with storm techniques. Another way to refer to them is stick or club techniques. So let's start out relationships with idea called zone of action. So zone of action is exactly what it sounds like. In this case, using securing the storm, our zone of action is where we're going to be doing all of our action. In this case, on the inside of that club. Okay, so let's do an opposite here. Let's change our zone of action to the outside rather than the inside. And that brings us something like returning storm. Now, keep in mind a couple of things. First, we're still doing that jamming, the same strategy, but instead of doing it with one hand, now we're doing it with two. Okay? So let's change our zone of action to underneath. And if we do that, you'll notice that we're going from a horizontal to a vertical circle. So in this case, we get something like an obstructing the storm if we stick with what we did previously. Again, jamming, the same concept that we did, but just like returning storm, we're doing it with two hands. Now we could change the strategy, but still stay with those two hands and still underneath, and that would bring us something like a capturing the storm. Okay. So now that we've done all that on circles, let's switch it over to lines. And that would bring in something like clipping the storm, where they're now coming in on this line, and now notice what happened. Our zone of action is now on top of that stick. So we can go back to repeating some of the stuff we did, but still stick to that linear path. And yeah, guess what? That brings us something like circling the storm, where we're now back on the outside of that stick again. So that's enough of that. Let's move on to a different way of using these exact same techniques through a different perspective. And this perspective is the ability to strip that weapon from the opponent. So let's start out base idea. Securing the storm. So what happens here? We get here, we get to this point in the technique where we're actually controlling the weapon, but we have available strips available to us, but we don't take advantage of them. We go right into the rest of the technique. But there are a variety of different strips that we could do here, which we don't do, just to repeat ourselves. So let's compare this to something like a clipping the storm, where again, we get on top of this, get this weapon diverted from us, and now we have the ability to strip the weapon. And in the base idea of the technique, we could either A, go directly towards the opponent like we did in securing the storm, or B, similar to what we did in securing the storm, we can then strip the weapon, going directly to the weapon itself. Let's compare this a little bit back to securing the storm, where we could have gone to the opponent or the stick for both the strips. So now that we've done that, let's move on to where we don't have the availability of doing a strip. So in this case, something like that, circling the storm again, where if you notice we're on the outside, we've done the diversion, but we really don't have availability to strip. So what we do instead is we use a different concept, in this case, the zoning. So we're actually going behind and controlling the opponent by getting away from the stick. So let's talk through a different way that we can do this stripping stuff. Something like an obstructing the storm. If you notice, we go all the way through the technique, don't do strips at all, even though we could have. Instead, what we do at the very end, so that we don't leave our opponent with the stick, we just take the stick away and depart. Compare that to capturing the storm, where we actually use the stick to hit them, don't strip it yet, but then once we've done the hit, we set them up through the strip and then use that strip again at the very end. And if we compare this to returning storm again, what happens is in returning storm, we get to here, we can finish up the technique, and now we strip the technique like we did in capturing the storm and use it at the very end. Okay, up. So in recap, what did we do? We made some contrasts between A, stripping abilities, and B, zone of action, different areas in which you can work the stick against the opponent. Hope this video helps you understand the American Kenpo system just a little bit better. Thank you very much.